Picture this with me. Are you ready? It's 11 p.m. and your stomach is grumbling because it needs a little snack. Yeah, you're already with me. It's late and maybe you've heard all the stories about how eating food right before you go to bed is bad for you, whatever that means. Anyways, you suddenly remember that you have this little app called Postmates that can magically bring you whatever you need to make your stomach feel okay again. So you open it up, find yourself on the Taco Bell menu, and before you know it, 2 chalupas and a steak quesadilla are in a stranger's car headed to your house. We've all been there, right? No? Well, then you're welcome for being vulnerable. That situation is one I wish I could tell you I made up, but it's been too real for me too many times. It hurts to admit because I don't even normally eat Taco Bell. It just happens to be my temptation when it's late and I'm hungry. It's like in that moment, it's all I can think about. Okay, so now that I've been real with you, let's be real with each other. We all face temptations. And no, Taco Bell isn't all that big of a deal, unless it leads me to a really unhealthy lifestyle, but that's a different conversation. We all have things that tempt us. It's the temptation to smack your little brother when your stepmom isn't looking. You won't hit him too hard, just hard enough to drive him crazy. It's the urge to stay up late playing video games instead of studying for that test, even though you know you'll be tired and unprepared the next day. It's the desire to bend the truth oh so slightly, just so you don't have to fully explain why you got home late. And then there are temptations that aren't as easy to admit or laugh about. For example, we show up for that test that we didn't study for, and we feel really tempted to cheat off of the person next to us because teacher will never catch us. Or we went to that party, we were tempted to drink, so we did. Then we were tempted to get drunk, so we did. And then we were tempted to lie about what happened. The temptations just keep going. Or maybe after school, a friend tempted us to vape. I mean, it's not as bad as smoking, right? But now we are also tempted to hide it from our parents and lie about what we're really using our gas money for. Or maybe we're tempted to say bad stuff about that person because, well, maybe there's no good reason. Sometimes you just want to roast somebody. Or maybe we see the shirt we've been wanting hanging on the rack at the store. We're tempted to grab it and attempt to sneak it out of the store. Or we stay up late scrolling through our phone and we suddenly feel the urge to go to that website or that profile that we wouldn't really be proud to talk about with our small group. The more we think about it, the stronger the temptation gets. We all face temptations of all sorts. And the truth is, sometimes we give into them and feel terrible about it. We just want to get the temptation out of our minds and never think about it again. While other times we don't necessarily think it's that big of a deal. I mean, what is it that causes us to want to do things that we know we shouldn't do in the first place? And is there anything we can do about that? Let's talk about it. But not just through my own thoughts and opinions. Instead, I want to go back a couple thousand years and share a real experience that can help all of us when we face temptations. It may come as a surprise, but Jesus actually experienced temptation too. Yes, the guy that some of us believe is actually God in human form was tempted to do some things that were not right. It's also true that he never gave in to temptation once. Instead, he lived a perfect life. Here's what that means. Temptation is not bad. It's our response to temptation that matters. In fact, if you've ever been mad at yourself or annoyed for feeling tempted about something, here's what I can tell you. Jesus isn't mad at you. He's been there and he wants to help. As we look at Jesus' story as it was written by one of his closest friends, Matthew, we see one of the first things we need to deal with when it comes to facing temptation. Check it out. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Okay, so there's a lot going on here. You have Jesus feeling hungry, like me before a Taco Bell splurge, and 40 days without eating. The tempter was really trying to get Jesus out of his mind. And hello, who is the tempter? This tempter is later referred to as the devil. And it makes you wonder what Matthew is talking about because there are several different images that can come to mind. Maybe you hear that and think about the spooky guy from Halloween movies, or the little dude sitting on your shoulder telling you to do bad things. Or you are thinking about the devil, like the enemy of all things good and holy. Honestly, it's been debated about what that means. However, that isn't as important as knowing that the Greek word Matthew used when he wrote this down many years ago meant tempter. And that's important because we all face tempters. Maybe we wouldn't call it the devil, maybe we would, but there's a lot that could fall under that category. For example, a friend that tries to convince you to do something that you know you shouldn't do, or an ad or picture that catches your eye and causes your mind to wander. Or maybe the voice of temptation that pops in your mind and urges you to do something that you know is wrong. We all know what it's like to feel a nudge from the tempter. And what's odd is that thousands of years after Jesus was tempted, that voice of temptation often takes its first shot at tripping us up by using the same tricks. It tempts us not by focusing on what we're doing, but by focusing on what we believe about who we are. Here's what I mean. Just before Jesus faced these moments of temptation, God literally spoke and said this: "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." God affirms Jesus' identity as valuable, accepted, and loved. But when the tempter approaches Jesus, he says, "If you are the Son of God." The first thing the tempter does is question Jesus' identity. If he can get Jesus to forget his identity, then maybe Jesus will forget how much he matters. If the tempter could get Jesus to forget how much he matters, then maybe Jesus would do something that he wouldn't normally do. In reality, this plays out with you and I when we are tempted as well. If I think that I'm never good enough for my parents, so I'll never be good enough for anything, then who cares if I mess up my future? Why should I even try? Or if I think that I'm not popular and no one really likes me, then I'll treat other people badly so I can feel better about myself. Or if I think that I'm not really worth much, then I'll use my body like it's not worth much, because at least a hookup feels valuable in the moment. Or if I think that I'm not smart enough to pass this test anyway, why should I study? It won't help. Or if I think that I'm a bad person, then I also may think that I deserve bad things, or it makes sense for me to do things that aren't good for me. But on the flip side, if I think that I matter, then I'll make decisions that protect my future. If I think that I'm a good person, then I'll aim for good actions. Or if I think I have a part to play in God's plan for the world, then I'll work hard and find opportunities to serve others. Here's the point. Who I think I am changes what I do. Another way to say it is, what I think is true about me influences what I do. That's why temptation starts by trying to convince us that we're something that we're not. All of us have a wrestling match going on between who God says we are and thoughts that say the exact opposite. It's challenging to make sense of what's true about us versus lies that come from the tempter. That's why it's so important to choose to believe that God knows us better than we know ourselves. Think about it this way. Let what God says about you influence what you do. This isn't just about feeling better about ourselves. For many of us, what we think about ourselves spills into our actions. It's either building up our lives or tearing them down. Of course, controlling those thoughts is easier said than done, right? You can't control every thought that pops up in your brain. That's why I think another writer and leader named Paul, who had his own life-changing encounter with Jesus, writes this: "We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." This means that we can actually take hold of those tempting, untrue thoughts, whether they are coming from our own minds or from things others have said about us, and remind ourselves of what God says is true instead. So, how do we do this? Here are a couple steps that you can take to get started. First, think about what you think about. Pay attention to your thoughts and what you're tempted to believe about yourself. You don't have to believe negative things people say about you, and don't just let unhelpful or unhealthy thoughts stay in your head. Instead, choose to pay attention to what's going on in there. Second, replace what's untrue with what's true. A great place to find what's true is Scripture. The stories and words written by people whose lives have been shaped by God can be helpful reminders of what's true about you. You can also turn to friends or a small group leader that you trust who will help you see what's true. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we have small group, because everybody needs somebody who will remind us of what's true and good about us. We all have doubts about who we are and how God made us. But for a moment, imagine if those doubts weren't true. How would your life be different if you stopped letting lies about your identity influence what you do? What would your internal conversations sound like? Listen, this isn't just a high school thing. Temptation is a human thing. We're all tempted to do things even when we know better. And oftentimes, when we give in, it's because our minds have convinced us that we are not who God says that we are. This week, I want you to imagine how your life might look different if you let what God says about you influence what you do.